The many different shapes of the world throughout history. Obviously, we didn't really know what the entire Earth looked like up until relatively recently. For the past 2,000 years, our knowledge of the continents have really been limited. So as of 150 AD, we had a large portion of the old world figured out, and even then it wasn't perfect, although you can generally see the shape of the Mediterranean here, as well as the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, the Arabian Peninsula. This is actually pretty good. We decided to throw everyone off in the year 1050 though by doing a egg shape. This is supposed to be Europe, Asia, and Africa. There's also more depictions of biblical lands in this map here. In the year 1154, we were really obsessed with islands, it appears. We were trying to log all those little islands out there. I kind of feel like the Mediterranean map was made worse than it was 1,000 years ago. I mean, this actually looks pretty good for back in the day. You could see as humans were literally cut off from most of Africa because of the Sahara Desert. If you didn't know, it was kind of difficult to cross this massive thing. It's also funny how you can really see where a lot of these maps were being built just because of like how big a lot of the European continent is drawn. Meanwhile, things get less accurate the further out towards Eastern Asia you get. By 1375, we pretty much had a perfect European continent. We were just still figuring out what was south of the Sahara Desert, and then we had got to India, or at least figured out there's a peninsula over there. It feels like they still had a certain number of islands they thought were in the world, and they just decided to jam-pack them all over here. Or maybe this is supposed to be the Philippines. By 1489, we had begun the age of exploration. We were about to discover the Americas, and we had a lot of the Eastern Hemisphere somewhat figured out. I mean, as you can see, they had definitely figured out South Africa and everything down there. I believe this is probably Siberian lands, very icy, and this might be Japan. It looks like Sri Lanka, but I think it's maybe Japan or Indonesia, their idea of it anyways. By 1529, colonization was already off and running, so as you can see, we have a really good idea of the Caribbean, South America, and North America. It's going to take us a minute to figure out this edge over here, and still no Japan, although we did know that there was an Indonesia over here and maybe the Philippines. By 1599, we were still kind of moving around the American continent. We have a lot of the western coast figured out. We finally got to Japan over here, as well as we were about to discover Australia. By 1778, we have an independent United States, and most things, at least generally discovered. Obviously, you can see where it's not perfect, but you know, they were doing their best. Look at these Great Lakes too. Finally, by 1832, we have pretty much figured out everything, at least coastal wise. Things on the interior are a little bit of a different story, probably in Africa as well as in the Amazon rainforest in South America. I mean, technically in some of those regions, we're still figuring out what's going on in the interiors. Crazy to think of, we just kind of figured out everything about 200 years ago, at least mapping out the coastlines. Here are the sizes of the homes of world heads of state. Some are obviously bigger than others, as you can imagine. Now keep in mind, these are only the top 20 in the world. Starting off the list, we have France in 20th with 78,000 square meters. Then there's this German home at 90,000 and Vietnam in 18th place at 140,000. It was a pretty big jump up there. Belarus in 17th place. Wow, this thing looks really communist, which historically that shouldn't be a surprise at all. This thing is absolutely giant, and we're not even in the top 10 yet. You're telling me that one dude lives here? Well, I'm sure they function as more than just a home. Italy in 16th place, just barely bigger, and the Philippines in 15th. I love that they have the flag and basically the overall shape of the palace. Cambodia in 14th, Brunei in 13th, Bangladesh in 12th. We have this Austrian structure in 11th, and finally South Korea in 10th. This looks like literally a Samsung building. In the US, we have the White House. I guess in South Korea, this is called the Blue House. I'm going to assume that not all the leaders choose to live in these spots. Maybe they did in the past though. Now we're in the top 10. We've got Argentina with over 300,000 meters squared, Syria in 8th, Mauritania in 7th, Malaysia in 6th. This is almost at a million. That's crazy. Japan is 5th with the Imperial Palace. I'm sure these squared meters is not just coming from the structure alone. It's definitely coming from like the surrounding area as well. India is actually in 4th place, so there's still 3 more bigger than this. The UAE is actually in 3rd. Then we have Sweden in number 2. That was the last place I expected to be here. And then finally at number 1, we have China with this building. Does it have its own like airport too? It literally has its own lake and island. That's how you know this thing is huge. They've got their own tennis court, a clinic, an auditorium, a poolside house. So does the president of China just like live randomly in different buildings every night? He probably doesn't sleep in the same place twice. Dang, I need to run for president of China. The White House estate would fit inside the Chinese one around 47 times. Dang, we gotta pump our numbers up or something. White House out here looking weak. We covered a bunch of flat maps in the beginning of this video, but as I've said already 1,000 times, those are not perfectly accurate. Here is exactly how much bigger Mexico gets when changing spots with Greenland. And this is actually something I recently discovered. I once again still fall for the trick. I always thought Mexico really wasn't that huge. Mexico is massive, but on most world maps, they're near the equator, which means they're shrunk significantly. If you just moved Mexico over on top of the US, I mean from Seattle, which is where Tijuana is, in order to get to the most southern part of the country, you'd have to go down to Louisiana. It's even crazier when you put Tijuana on London. Then in order to go to like Cancun, you'd be somewhere deep into Turkey, or from the northernmost part of Scotland, you can go into Russian lands over here. I actually didn't realize how similar Greenland and Mexico kind of were. Just, you know, different climates kind of. That's an understatement. This is what is known as the Himalayan Weather Wall. And this is obviously because there is a massive jump in elevation when you get to the Himalayan mountain range, as well as just the Tibetan plateau in general. It is very high up. So though it can be literally 104 degrees Fahrenheit right here along the border of Nepal, about 100 miles away, and the temperature will literally drop in half. And this has all happened as the Indian subcontinent has smashed into this other continent, giving us the world's tallest mountain range. So easy to forget too just how giant this stuff is over here. The Tibetan plateau is 4,000 meters above sea level, and for this it is called the roof of the world. The 25 largest urban parks in the world. I'm gonna make a guess that number 1 or 2 is going to be in either Russia or Canada, just because they've got so much land up there. Those are the 2 biggest countries by surface area in the world. So leading off the list, we have number 25 in North Carolina. The US is also gonna have some pretty big parks as well. Then we have Louisville, Kentucky in 24, Lithuania in the 23rd spot with 67 acres. That's impressive considering Lithuania's size. It's easy for us in the US to make massive parks, but it's another thing for the tiny Baltic nations. In 22, we have Mission Trails in San Diego, California. Then there's Newport in Virginia. Leading off the top 20, we have Texas, Florida, and then Texas again. The first park over 10,000 acres is actually in London, UK. I think I was actually there. I think I got lost there. The place where that didn't have any lights. Definitely been here in 15th, 11,000 acres in Rome, Italy. There's Texas, Canada, Pakistan, Arizona, and then to lead off the top 10, we have South Korea. Wait, is South Korea actually hiding a giant man in there? From the looks of it, they definitely could. I don't think we know the answer for sure. Louisiana is in 9th with a large croc. We have Texas, El Paso in 8th, Moscow, Russia now in 7th. Figured Russia would have a lot more in the top 25. There's Arizona, there's Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Pakistan is in 4th, South Africa's in 3rd, Canada's in 2nd, and actually Alaska's in 1st. I thought it would be Canada. So this is the biggest national park in the entire world. It can be literally seen on a map. I don't know why I didn't expect this. Of course Alaska would have this. Honestly, it doesn't even look real. It looks like it could be AI generated. Maybe that's just because this is at 240p quality. Pakistan actually showed up a surprising amount of times on this list as well. They really like their parks, I guess. The world's largest cities by population size. Let's just get into it. I think a lot of us already know Tokyo, Japan is number 1 with almost 40 million. Although Delhi in number 2 is supposed to pass up Tokyo by 2028. It is literally insane that there's going to be more than 40 million people living in this tiny area. Shanghai finishes off the top 3 with 27 million in China. Unsurprisingly, some of the most populated cities on Earth are coming out of Asia. But a bit more shocking, Sao Paulo, Brazil is the 4th largest city. Again, large population numbers usually aren't seen out of the Western Hemisphere, but Rio here seems to be really packing in the people. I mean, it is pretty noticeable in population maps of this country. But 5th is actually Mexico City, which is pretty close behind. Then we go back to India in 6th, Cairo, Egypt in 7th, Beijing, Mumbai, Osaka. New York is actually not even in the top 10 anymore, and no European cities have even made this list. There's 3 more in Asia. We've got Buenos Aires in Argentina, and then a couple more African cities. The largest city, Tokyo, has nearly 3 times the amount of people than the 20th largest city in China. I feel like I'm most shocked that South America managed to squeeze in there twice. Argentina only has about 45 million people living in it, in like the country as a whole, and 15 of those 45 million are living in the capital. So basically 1/3 of the entire country's population lives right here. This is pretty insane, although I know some other countries have even crazier percentages as well. The nations in green are lands not covered by any UN official language. So there's actually only 6 official UN languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. Spanish. The problem is that really only covers a portion of the globe. There's still a pretty good amount that are left off here. So among some of the biggest is Portuguese, which is obviously spoken in Portugal and Brazil, and then German, which is also a pretty popular language as well, pretty popular second language too. And then we can't forget about Russian and Indonesia, Bengali. Well, actually, the biggest by far, not here, is Hindi at 600 million. It's a large portion that's left off here. Now, this map has most of South Asia under English, so maybe that's what they're thinking. It's also not labeled here in green as well, but it's still kind of crazy. Of course, there's languages like Thai, Vietnamese that aren't here, Korean, Japanese, Mongolian. Kind of funny that Libya was an Italian colony at one point, but they squeezed in there under Arabic, yet the Italian language is not represented. I mean, there's cases like Portugal and all of Portugal's colonies which didn't squeeze in like these ones in Africa. For comparison, the EU has 24 official languages. A little bit of a different situation there, but just wanted to say the different speed limits for every part of the world. And let's just get this out of the way. The only truly free nation on Earth happens to be Germany. How am I supposed to feel free if I can't floor it in my sedan? Let's go over some of the countries that have some of the lowest speed limits in the world, or 45 miles or less. So South Sudan and Liberia require all their people, probably not at all areas, but in maybe a majority of the areas, to go under 45 miles per hour. Just put me in jail already. I'm not going that speed limit. Write me up 20 tickets right now. I'm not going to pay for them. Again, I don't think it's strict across the entire country, just like how some parts of Germany do have speed limits. There are parts of the Autobahn that do, but for the most part, there is no limit. Other places that are limited to only 45 miles per hour, Haiti and Papua New Guinea, unfortunately. On the opposite end of the spectrum, places that almost have no limit, or the limit is 100 miles per hour, it is just the UAE, which I feel like I have heard this before. A lot of people are taking their sports cars there. Gonna buy a Lamborghini, you want to actually be able to test it out, see how fast it can go. Now, there's a lot more places with the 85 limit. That includes Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Turkey, Bulgaria, Poland, as well as the only state, Texas, which is at 85. Again, we're talking about max speed limits. Of course, there are spots in Texas where you cannot go 85 miles per hour. But what I find interesting about this map is, because I have family in Texas, the police are really strict about the speed limit there. Like, you can't even go 1 or 2 miles per hour over. They will write you the ticket. Versus California, we have, I think the max is 65 here in highways. The thing is, almost everyone goes more than that. Like, it's really common. And the police are very unlikely to actually pull you over for it. I mean, they can technically, but they usually don't care. Now, if you're going like 10 to 15 miles per hour more than it, yeah, you're kind of pushing your luck, especially at 20 more, you're gonna get pulled over. But 5, you're for sure good. I'll say if you're going 70 and a 65, you're gonna be okay in California. Unless you're doing something else to make yourself look, I don't know, sketchy. That's what I find interesting about this map. I think every country probably enforces the rules differently as well. Technically, the dark green, the maximum speed limit is 70, and then here in the Northeast, these states have a maximum speed limit of 65. There's a lot more people condensed over here though, maybe that's why. And look at some of these red countries. Though it's not as low as 45 degrees, still under 50. Bolivia, maximum speed limit is under 50. That's crazy. And then there's a couple others here in the Americas. Same goes for Madagascar and Sudan. I'm thinking of cars too much right now. I'm absolutely sure there are probably asterisks that go with all of this information in all these different countries. Still interesting to look at though. The 10 busiest ports in all of Europe. Number 1 happens to be Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and number 2 is actually their neighbor Belgium. Antwerp is right on their tail. Then we actually have 2 spots in Germany, then Valencia, Spain, this spot in Greece. At first I was a little bit surprised that the UK was so low on the list. But if you think about it, I mean, these ports are so massive because they're porting in resources for like the entire continental Europe. UK is only porting in their stuff for their island, I guess. Of course, there were other ports smaller than this, but I mean, these are the biggest ones. Usually this Italian port made it. I would have thought like another port maybe more north of Italy would have been higher. I guess the lowland nations are dominating though. Here are all the major league teams for cricket in the United States. I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I didn't even know we had a major league cricket. And one of them is in my own backyard too, Los Angeles Knight Riders. I'm fairly confident I've never heard of this in my entire life. Oh, this is because this is just a recent thing. It started in 2023. So maybe I will hear about it. That's usually what happens in these videos. I'll cover something and then like a week later I'll see like in real life, oh, very international team here we have in LA too. This guy from India, the US, Pakistan, Canada, South Africa, even Guyana's showing up on the list. There are 6 teams in major US cities so far. I'm extremely curious to see how this is going to work. There's also the San Francisco Unicorns, the Seattle Orcas, I'm liking these names so far, the Texas Super Kings, finally the Washington Freedom, and the MI New York. They don't have a name? What is it? UMI, New York. I would actually be down to go to one of these if it was basically free. If they just hand out tickets, okay. Man, some of these stadiums though are really not holding that many people. It will be interesting to see if the cricket world can expand. These are the apparent size of moons and the sun as viewed from each planet's surface. So if you're viewing from Mercury, Mercury has no moons, so you're literally just looking at a giant creepy sun. Reminds me of the flag of Argentina. Same goes for Venus, although Venus is a little bit further away from the sun, so it's not going to be as big as you'd see it from Mercury. Obviously, we all know on Earth we have one sun and one moon, and they're both about the same size, which is kind of incredible that it worked out like that. What are the chances? No wonder early humans were so confused. Then there's Mars, who is even further away from the sun and has some pretty tiny moons. I mean, they could barely even be called moons, I feel. There's the gas giant and the biggest planet in our solar system, Jupiter, which has several moons and is still pretty far away from the sun. This is one giant creepy moon right here. There's Saturn with even more moons, it looks like, and again, even further from the sun. Uranus, where it almost looks like the sun is just a regular star in the night. Neptune maybe is a better example of that. Wow, there's just so many creepy moon faces. And finally, the most terrifying of them all. I'm so sorry, Pluto. What's his name? Sharon? Sharon needs to get off your back. I absolutely love that the sun and moon emojis were used for this. It made it so much better. I still use these emojis to this day when I want to be creepy.
And big thanks to my patrons.
Help, this is the real Drew. I was kidnapped and that's the
Drew's
imposter.
Argentinian
The slow,
grandpa.
depressing Portugal
Schengen,
Bryton
follow
Amateur.
Archaeology.
Is alive.
JohnDenver,
KirinoIsBestGirl.
Phresh Animations,
TheGreatRalphy.
the Polish-Lithuanian
I kidnapped Drew.
Commonwealth.
His ransom is 5
ZaneyBoi,
fillet of fish,
and why
he's
am I
at
doing this?
308 Negro Arroyo Lane.